So, guys, ever since Christian Parker took over the Cowboys defense, most of the conversation has been about the new scheme, the defensive line, and the star players expected to make the biggest impact. But while everyone has been focused on those big names, one young linebacker has quietly flown under the radar. He barely received any attention this offseason, and most analysts haven't even talked about him. But after taking a closer look at his rookie film, one thing becomes pretty clear: that his skill set may actually be a perfect fit for Christian Parker's defense. So, let me break down who this linebacker is and how he could become an important piece of the Cowboys defense in 2026. What's up, Cowboys Nation? Welcome to the NFL Playbook, Cowboys. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So, the player I'm going to talk about is Shemar James. He was a 5th-round pick last year, and honestly, most people slept on him from the moment he got drafted. But here is the part that should get your attention. He led the entire Cowboys defense in tackles last season, and he only started 6 games. Think about that for a second. A rookie, a 5th-round pick, taken with a defense around him that struggled at times, and he still finished as the leading tackler on the team. That is not a small accomplishment, and people love to say the defense was bad, so of course he racked up tackles. But that take does not give him enough credit. Somebody still has to be around the ball on every single play, and Shemar James was doing exactly that. He was only 21 years old last season, just old enough to have a drink, and he was already the heartbeat of this defense in terms of production. Now let me tell you how he actually looks like on tape, because that tells the real story. Physically, Shemar James is not built like your typical linebacker. He does not have the thick thighs, the big neck, or the bulky frame that a lot of coaches want at that position. He is more in that 220 to 225 pound range, which is on the lighter side for the position. He is really a converted safety, a hybrid type of player who ended up at linebacker. But do not let the size fool you, because once you turn on his college tape at Florida, you see a player who gets out of his stance like he was shot out of a cannon. That first step quickness is what makes him dangerous, especially when he is asked to blitz. That blitzing ability might be his best trait right now. When you send him through the A gap or the B gap, he does not hesitate. He is downhill in an instant, hands up, disrupting the quarterback before the offense even knows what hit them. There is a play where he comes screaming through the B gap and gets home so fast that the quarterback is forced to pull the ball, and it results in a fumble. That kind of impact play is not something you coach easily. That is instinct and burst, and Shemar James has both. He reminds me a lot of Donovan Wilson in the way he uses that same explosive first step to make plays behind the line of scrimmage. If Christian Parker wants a guy who can be sent on stunts, twists, and delayed blitzes from the second level, this is exactly the type of player who thrives in that role. Now, before we move any further, it is worth pointing out just how limited his college role actually was compared to what he is now being asked to do. At Florida, he was often used in a more simplified role, closer to the line of scrimmage, where his job was mainly to be aggressive and attack downhill. Now, at the professional level, he is being asked to process much more information before the snap, read multiple keys at once, and still fly around with the same explosiveness. That jump from college to the pros is one of the hardest transitions for any linebacker to make, and the fact that he was already producing at a high level as a rookie while still learning all of that says a lot about his upside going forward. Now, let us talk about the scheme change, because this matters how Shemar James gets used going forward. Christian Parker is shifting this defense toward more of a 3-4 look instead of the old 4-3. That means fewer down linemen and more responsibility on the linebackers to read and react. In some of these clips, you can see the defense lined up with 4 defensive linemen and a 7-man front, which puts Shemar James in a 2-gap situation depending on how the offensive line and the running back flow. On one particular play, the defensive tackle takes the A gap, which leaves Shemar James responsible for the B gap on his side. The idea is simple. Wherever the running back steps, the linebacker should be mirroring that movement, so he stays in position to fill his gap. This is actually where you can see some of his rookie growing pains. On one play, he does not mirror the running back the way you would want, and instead gets his eyes pulled by a tight end coming across the formation. Now, to be fair, reading a pulling tight end is a legitimate coaching point, and he does eventually get his shoulders square and shows off great range to make the play from sideline to sideline. But if the quarterback had pulled the ball on a keeper, or if the running back had cut it back, that hesitation could have opened up a big gap in the defense. This is the kind of detail that gets cleaned up with more reps and more film study, and it is exactly the type of coaching point that Christian Parker and this new staff will be drilling into him. What really stands out watching him, though, is his ability to slip blocks instead of taking them on directly. There is a play where an offensive lineman is trying to wash him out of the play completely, and instead of getting engulfed, Shemar James slides around the block, barely gets touched, squares his shoulders back up, and still makes the tackle. For a guy his size, that kind of awareness and body control is a real asset. He knows he cannot always win with strength against bigger offensive linemen, so he wins with quickness and instincts instead. That trait alone should get Cowboys fans excited, because it means he is not just a straight-line athlete, he actually processes the game at a high level for his age. But still, there is a real weakness in his game that needs to be addressed, and that is his ability to anchor against bigger blockers. There is a clip where a tight end simply drives him back several yards with no real disengagement from Shemar James. When you are undersized at linebacker, your hands and your technique have to make up for what you lack in raw power, and right now that part of his game is still developing. Looking at the current linebacker room, the one player who really shows that ability to shed blockers and still make the tackle is Jaishawn Barham, who flashed that trait back at Michigan. If Shemar James does not improve in that department, offenses that run heavier personnel groupings with multiple tight ends are going to try and run right at him. And that is something this coaching staff will be very aware of heading into the season. And this also raises an interesting question about the linebacker room as a whole heading into camp. With Shemar James flashing this kind of blitzing ability and gap discipline that is still coming along, the coaching staff has to figure out how to build a rotation that maximizes his strengths while covering for the areas he is still developing. It would not be surprising to see him paired with a bigger, more physical presence next to him who can hold up better against double teams and heavier run looks, while Shemar James is freed up to attack gaps and make plays in space. That kind of complementary pairing is common in the modern NFL, where teams do not need every linebacker to do everything, as long as the group together covers all the bases. Communication is another area where Shemar James already looks ahead of his years. You can see him on film pointing out assignments, identifying the strong side tight end, and getting his teammates lined up correctly before the snap. For a rookie, especially one who is only 21 years old, that level of command on the field says a lot about his football IQ. You know, linebackers are basically the quarterbacks of the defense, and if a young player already has that kind of presence and awareness, it usually means the physical tools will keep catching up as he gains more experience. In coverage, Shemar James did not see a massive workload in man-to-man last season, only being targeted a handful of times, but he does show promise in zone coverage, particularly out of a cover 2 look. In that scheme, his main focus becomes the number 2 receiver or tight end, while the corner sits underneath in the flat and the safety plays over the top. You can see him reading the quarterback's eyes, staying patient, and then breaking hard once the ball comes out. That aggressive trigger once he reads the play is exactly what you want from a linebacker in zone coverage, because hesitation in that spot usually leads to a big gain for the offense. What makes that trigger even more encouraging is that it did not come with a lot of experience in that exact role. He was not a full-time coverage linebacker at Florida, so the fact that he is already showing sound instincts in zone drops without a ton of man coverage snaps to fall back on is another sign that his football IQ translates across different situations. Coverage is often the last thing a young linebacker figures out because it requires patience and discipline instead of just pure athleticism. And seeing him trust his eyes and break on time this early in his career is a good sign for where his game can go from here. Putting it all together, Shemar James looks severely underrated, and he is quietly becoming a key piece of this defense. He has the burst to win on blitzes, the football IQ to diagnose plays fast, and instincts you cannot teach. Yes, he still needs to clean up his work against bigger blockers and stay disciplined in his gap fits, but those are the kind of things that get ironed out with more reps under Christian Parker. With training camp only a couple of weeks away, this is a storyline worth watching. A young linebacker who already led the defense in tackles as a rookie is now stepping into a new scheme built to highlight his best traits. If Christian Parker finds creative ways to unleash his blitzing ability, Shemar James could turn into one of the biggest surprises on this Cowboys defense this season. Keep an eye on him, because this might be one of the best value picks this front office has made in years. If you are locked in on everything happening with this Cowboys defense heading into the season, make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you do not miss any of the breakdowns coming your way as training camp approaches. Drop a comment down below and let me know if you think Shemar James ends up being a full-time starter by the time the season kicks off, because I want to hear what you all think.